Hello, everyone. Today we have Nancy Daniels. If you don't know Nancy, it's because you have not been in the business for a little bit. So, for all of you guys, I have Nancy here. Nancy, for the people who don't know you, can you share your background and how you became involved in the ATM industry?
Certainly. I've been involved in the ATM industry for almost 40 years now. I've worked for three of the major OEMs for about a decade each. Most recently with Hyosung, where I spent about 14 years with those folks. Engineer by background, and oddly enough, I was working on nuclear weapons. And when the Cold War ended, I needed a job, and I ended up in the ATM industry.
There you go. So, from the cold to the ATM. You were the speaker or the main speaker for ATMIA, and you talked to us about securing the front lines, combating cyber attacks on the ATM networks. Tell me, why is this important? Because for a lot of the
Yeah,
new operators, this might be new.
yeah, and this is a subject. Thank you, Frank. It's a subject I'm pretty passionate about, and as you said, I was a keynote speaker at ATMA. It's a subject, and I've spoken to NACK and other organizations about this. Uh, Most people, first of all, the industry we're in, we manage boxes full of cash, and the criminals out there are, they want to get at that cash, and increasingly, things have shifted from the kind of smash and grab stuff we've seen in the past to much more sophisticated approaches to really sort of attacking ATM networks. And in fact, in 2025, without naming the operator, we had the largest cyber attack that ever occurred in the ATM network, with almost 14,000 ATMs were impacted. So this is a very, very serious area. And if you're a new operator, or you're operator with 100, a few hundred ATMs, you may not realize it, but you're just as vulnerable as those larger operators as well. And there's some very simple steps that you can sort of take to protect your machines. Because what we're trying to avoid are really, again, it's not the sort of smash and grabs, the guy with a Ford F-150 and a chain kind of ripping an ATM out of a bodega. We're talking about very sophisticated criminal networks now using AI tools to basically attack ATMs at the source, whether that is at the switch, at your processor, or whatever, and using that to take over your ATM network to basically steal cash from the ATM. Now, the good news is the ATM itself, it is a very secure device, particularly in the ISO IAD space. It's almost impossible for someone to sort of inject malware or bad software at that ATM, because it doesn't have a hard drive or any of the things you might have in a normal computer. It is an extremely secure device. But the problem is that your ATMs are connected to the network, which are necessary, obviously, to do processing, to handle the credit cards, all that sort of stuff. And it's really, once it's exposed to the network, that's where the vulnerabilities exist. And there are some very simple things you can do. So first of all, at the ATM itself, password 123, not a really good password on the ATM, and or the default ATM password that comes from the manufacturer, whether that's Hyosung, Jamaica, whoever that is. Make sure you're changing that password. That's kind of a first line of protection of the machine itself. Where people get into trouble are with basically remote management software. And again, variety of manufacturers, whoever they are, again, Jamaica, Hyosung, Balloon, the folks from Title, everybody has some form of remote management software. And if you're and it's convenient, it's necessary to make your operation more efficient. You have to monitor how much cash in the machines, cash outs, transaction rates, all the things which are really necessary as a business person to make sure that that network of machines you have is possible. And so it's a very necessary tool. But that tool that you have to make sure is protected. And again, there are a number of things that you can sort of be concerned about. It's, again, making sure that the default password that comes with the machine, which, by the way, you can get out of the dark web, make sure you change that. And again, your birth date or password 123 is probably not a good idea. A good password is important. But more importantly is there's something called a firewall, which is the thing which sort of protects your remote management system from unauthorized access. And a lot of people think that the router that they have. Well, my router protects the machine. No, it doesn't. The router simply is the thing that provides the connection into the network. There are separate devices, and it's maybe $1,000, but that $1,000 is a necessary device to protect your your RMS system and your ATM network from outside intrusion. And this is sort of a simple device you can add to your ATM network, and like $800-900 from the various people that provide these things, and there's a bunch of people that provide them, and it just provides a basic layer of protection. The other thing which is very important is that we're all busy because you're running routes, you're making sure the cache is in place, you're going out and making sure you're finding customers, finding new sites, things like that. Things like keeping software updated, you may not sort of think about. And again, this is important. What I was saying, I don't know if you lost me, but what I was saying is that
The software.
we're all busy. Yeah, it's important to keep that software updated. And again, you got a lot of other things you're doing, but whether it's the software on the ATM itself, which the manufacturers update on a regular basis, usually adding new capabilities, but oftentimes with little security additions, but also the RMS software itself and your operating system. So the Windows operating system, you got to keep all that stuff updated because those are updated on a regular basis, again, to prevent kind of intrusions. Now, in the past, a lot of people have been in this business. The early people have been in this business, since the people were allowed to own ATMs back in the 90s. Things were not as complicated back then, and the challenge we have right now is that in the past it took very sophisticated technical capability to kind of do these attacks on ATM networks. And usually, and again, there's something I learned in private equity: the juice has to be worth the squeeze. In other words, you're going to attack a large network. You're not going to attack a small network because it's a big, complicated enterprise. The problem is that with AI tools now, that anybody can be a fairly unsophisticated person, and it's fairly easy for them to use those AI tools to attack those ATM networks. So where in the past it might have required some big complex criminal enterprise, now a kind of Joe criminal who say there's this guy who's got 100 ATMs and so forth. I'll download an AI tool off the dark web. I'll attack his RMS system, and then what I'll do is I'll jackpot all of his ATMs, and maybe I'll walk away with $100,000. The juice is worth the squeeze for that guy. That is really what's changed, is that AI, although it's making life easier in other ways, it's also making crime easier, which is why you have to make sure to protect yourself. And again, it's these simple things we talked about: making sure you've got passwords, firewall protecting your RMS system, making sure your RMS system is turned off when you're not using it, making sure you're updating your software. These are not very complicated things, but they're things which do take time. And again, in our busy lives, as you're running around and you're trying to get new customers and grow routes and so forth, those are things which are easy to forget. And I know that was a lot really quickly, Jonas. You can tell I'm passionate about this.
Yeah. I guess for the application side, I'm just thinking, would it be worth it for me to connect to the merchant's internet, or would it be worth it for me to have a private network using a wireless device from a wireless provider?
So generally, you don't want to connect to the merchant's network, and very simply because it's a black box. You don't know what's going on there, and and as we've sort of seen with a lot of the attacks that sort of occurred, and credit cards being stolen and personal data being stolen. Merchant networks can sometimes, even with large merchants, their networks can be just as vulnerable as the smaller network. And the thing is, if you connect into that merchant's network, you really don't know what you're connecting into, and you don't know what kind of vulnerability that you're going to have, and you could actually be exposing yourself to a greater extent. So most people you typically have a wireless connection. Wireless connections are very secure. You need to make sure that wireless connection is encrypted. There's something called TLS encryption, which is just basically something you can sort of turn on in the modem or the ATM, and on the receiving side, Uh, in the past, some processors didn't support this TLS encryption. Uh, Everybody does now, so that's not really kind of a problem. So basically, you want to make sure you have an encrypted connection, much the same as maybe the reason you use WhatsApp is you want to make sure your text messages are encrypted. Same thing. You want to make sure that the messaging which is going between your ATM and the processor switch, that's also encrypted. And the thing that you use is something called TLS to do that.
I guess I'm thinking about this, and I know the answer, but I think let's see what you think about it. Is it better that we connect to a phone line, even though the phone line doesn't exist anymore?
Well, again, it's odd you should say that because in many ways the phone lines were more secure back in the day.
Yeah.
And I'm old enough that I remember back in the day. So that was a very secure. It was a very secure kind of approach. So but the reality is today, most people are going to be connecting into a wireless modem.
Yes.
And again, the wireless modems, because you're going through the cell phone networks and so forth, again, they're very, very secure. But if you're transmitting data in the open, you're vulnerable. And so this simple step by simply, checking the box inside the ATM that turns TLS encryption on, making sure the modem is compatible, making sure your processor knows that you're using TLS encryption, it's done. And it's a one-time thing. You set up the ATM and it's done. But yeah, back in the day, phone lines were more secure.
Yeah.
Also,
I'm thinking about if I have this machine on a remote access or remote monitoring,
yes.
and if I'm downloading software from that cloud, am I safe, or is it something that I should bring my own software to, because we don't know where that cloud comes from?
Well, generally, if you're doing a software update, whether it's an update to your RMS software or it's an update to the actual machine software, you're getting it from the OEM. So most of the OEMs, again, will put out a notification that says, "Hey, this new software version is available," and most people are registered and they've got your serial numbers, your machines, and so forth, so they know you're a legitimate person. And so you're normally going to get it from a legitimate source. You don't want to be Googling, ATM software update for a GenMega 2500 or a Hyosung Halo, and say, oh, there's a CNET site that has it, because you don't know what that is. You want to make sure that you're getting that software from a legitimate source, which is from the OEM. Same thing is true of the RMS software as well.
But we were talking about downloading the software that you don't want to Google something and don't know where it comes from.
You want to make sure it's coming from the OEM, or or the dealer that you've gotten it from that is authorized OEM software, and even if you get it from, say, somebody you bought the ATM from, you want to make sure that this is a valid piece of software, because accidents happen. But you need to make sure it's an OEM certified piece of ATM. And again, the OEMs usually provide support sites. They have helplines. You can call them and say, hey, I got this notification. Is this a legitimate software update? That's all you need to do. Yeah, this is legit. Download it. You don't want to just sort of get it off the dark web or something like that, because you have no idea what it's going to be. And that's true for the ATM software updates, which are fairly infrequent, but also for the RMS software as well.
This is a topic that I was actually not planning on talking about, but I think it will be great since your experience and your value. What about buying used ATMs? Because people will be selling them as fleets out in the streets. Or am I safe as a new operator buying that? Because I don't know.
Now that I'm not working for an OEM, I can give you the honest answer to this. Okay. Absolutely, it is completely safe to buy used machines, and especially if you're a new operator and you're just getting into it, if you can get a machine out there that's a used machine, and the machine works and so forth, that's a perfectly safe thing. But the first thing you want to do when you get that machine is you want to make sure you update it to the most current software, and you want to make sure you change the password. You do those two things, you're golden. But maybe you could save, you can save $500,000 off a box by buying a used machine, and there's a lot of good used machines out there.
Good.
Because the reality is these machines last a long time.
Good. And I think you spoke about this, but just to make it very concrete, if you had to rank the biggest threats on the ATM operators that face today, what would they be?
So honestly, the biggest threat right now, in my opinion, really is the cybersecurity threat, and and we're seeing this very, very broadly. So it is, again, we've seen a significant drop in sort of smash and grab kind of attacks and so forth that we saw in the past. It is really making sure that the things that happen at scale, which are really cybersecurity threats, that in my mind is probably the biggest threat people see. Even like I say, we've seen a fairly significant drop in the amount of crime. A lot of the industry associations, NACK, ATMIA, myself, I've been personally involved in Washington D.C. with a lot of lobbying to make sure that the bank robbery laws that include ATMs have been changed. And so we've seen a lot of things tighten up in that space. So, and the result of that is there's been less physical crime. Of course, it still happens, but there's much, much less physical crime. Going back 3 years ago, that wasn't the case at all. There was a massive amount of ATM physical crime going on. So the criminals have really shifted from physical crime to really sort of cyber crime. So this is something to be taken very seriously. And in my opinion, that it really is the greatest threat at this point in time. But the important thing about it is that physical crime is kind of hard to protect against because usually those are crimes of opportunity and you don't know when they're going to happen. Cyber crime, however, is something that's very easy to protect against. There are very, very simple ways. The things I've sort of talked about, again, firewalling, passwording, keeping software updated. Those simple things will protect you from that cyber crime and really make sure that your machines, the cash you have in the machines, whether it's bailment, your cash, whatever, is protected.
I'm actually surprised that I don't hear change the top lock, check the card readers, check for skimmers. So none of that. I know those are concerns because those are valid concerns. But
it's interesting. The skimming was a huge going back 10 years. Skimming was a huge problem. And the reality is that, as we particularly when we were still mostly on NAG Stripe, skimming was just a huge problem. With chip and pin, really it's become much more difficult. That said, I mean, skimming is still an issue, and the skimmers that are out there are incredibly sophisticated these days. But again, they tend to are not attacking sort of. You don't tend to see those in smaller operators. Those are really going after POS terminals and things like that, where you've got a large number of stripes or swipes, as opposed to an ATM where maybe 150, 200 swipes a month. They're going to go after a POS terminal where they're getting like 100 swipes a day.
yes.
So that's really less of an issue. In addition to that, the cards and the processing networks have gotten much more sophisticated with their tools in terms of being able to detect and really notice really invalid cards and things of that nature. And in fact, in the FI space, a lot of major banks have stopped installing anti-skimming devices on their ATMs because what they're doing is they're protecting fraud at the software, the processing standpoint. So this is, like I say, 10 years ago, Franco, we'd be having a completely different conversation. This is kind of a huge issue. The lock, the top lock, this is, again, kind of simple protection. It is something, again, if you're a larger operator and you got 1,000 plus machines, yeah, that's something you probably should be doing. For a smaller operator, the reality is that those keys are relatively available, and you really got to look at whether or not the investment is really worth it. And I sort of question it because really with and again in an FI machine, that's a very, very different thing, because in an FI machine you've got a Windows-based machine with a hard drive, and there's a lot of things you can do to inject malware in that machine. A retail ATM, because of the way the computer in the retail ATM is designed, if somebody gets in there and so forth, there's not a lot they're going to be able to do to really impact that processor. Not that it's impossible, because we've seen, again, with AI tools, people are doing things that few years ago I thought were impossible, especially in the FI space. But in the ISO IID space, I think you're relatively protected. It's a good bit of insurance, and like I say, if you've got a significant number of machines, it probably is an investment that makes sense. If you're a smaller operator, I don't know that that is as important an investment as all the other things I sort of talked about.
That's excellent. I was actually going to ask a question in regards to new operators. A lot of people watching ATM Talks are new or thinking about buying their first ATM. What are the biggest security mistakes beginners could make? I know that you spoke about a lot of it, but if we just talk to them directly.
Okay, so if you're a beginner, and say you're just getting started in this, and you're trying to, you've listened to the passive income YouTube videos and stuff like that, and you think this is something you want to do, and this is what I suggest is just very simply think about the ATM as a computer, and whether I'm buying a new phone or a new tablet or a new computer, there's some very basic things I'm going to do, and sort of think about that ATM the same way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the password. My cousin Bob gave me a phone. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change the password. Same thing. If you buy a used ATM or even a new, you're going to change the password. Very, very simple. Number one. Secondly, again, we all have, whether it's, your religion is Samsung or Apple, we all have phones, and we're constantly getting software updates. So we just kind of naturally do those software updates. Again, if you're buying a machine, even if it's a new machine, very likely there's a software update. Just get the latest software update. Those are really the number one thing. So I don't want to overly complicate it with firewalls and RMS and all that other kind of stuff for a beginner. But for a basic thing, that's the important thing. The other thing is really making sure that, again, like using WhatsApp, that your information is encrypted. So if you're new to the space, and if maybe you bought an ATM from a dealer that provides processing capability, what you're going to do is you can ask a basic question. So, is the connection from my ATM to your processing, is it encrypted? And are you protecting me here? Much the same way as I would in a messaging app. Those are the very, very basic things.
That's excellent. I guess I know all this because we put it in place, and I just think, like, what is the difference between somebody that is a hustler and somebody that is a professional at doing this? What guidelines would you give somebody to jump into that next level? That now I'm a professional in the ATM industry, and I want to take this seriously in regards to security and how I operate my fleet.
Okay, and Jonas, it's a good question. And again, the key thing here is, as a professional, and if say you're setting up a company, and you really don't think about IT and security and all that stuff, and you got your home set up, you're not going to do a security audit or have somebody do penetration testing or any of this kind of stuff. If you are really making that transition from, as you say, a hustler, and as we know, there's a lot of hustlers who work awfully hard out there, and God bless them, to really where you're, say, scaling, and you're really becoming professional at this, and you're not talking about like a few ATMs, you're now talking a material number of ATMs. It would make a lot of sense, much the same as you would go, to a professional, is maybe have somebody who is a security professional really do an evaluation of your system. And there are a lot of security professionals out there. And again, it's not what I do, but there are a lot of security professionals out there that'd be happy to come in and for a reasonable amount of money, we'll do an audit of your system. Much the same way as you have a CPA that audits your books because you want to make sure you're clean with the IRS and CFPB and all those kind of guys. You want to make sure you're clean from an IT standpoint. So you just get somebody to just do a simple audit, and they may make some simple suggestions in terms of, hey, this port is open, or this really should be on a firewall, or maybe you really want to have this not running on your personal laptop. Maybe you want to have it running on the cloud or a different computer, and they'll provide that kind of basic advice to you.
We know the issue exists, and just to make it more real, more feasible, or more touching, do you have on top of your head what kind of losses an operator got hit that will be very tangible for somebody to know, like, I need to manage this better?
Yeah. In So 2024 was a very bad year for the industry. And there was a series of attacks that occurred in the latter part of 2024 because people were not conscious of all the things we were sort of talking about. And there were operators, that were professional operators, where the losses were in millions and millions of dollars. And and one operator in particular, I know, they didn't stop at his ATM network. They went and attacked his actual personal devices and the devices of his employees and so forth. And it became just a horrible, horrible situation. So we're talking about millions and millions of dollars. Again, the large attack that I know that occurred in early 2025, which was the one that occurred at scale, again, it was millions and millions of dollars.
So it's something that we have to take very serious. That from any operator, this could happen.
It could, and whether you've got 5 machines or you've got 10,000 machines, this is just something you need to be conscious aware of, and depending on scale, it's as simple as I sort of talk about, making sure software's updated, change passwords, or if you're doing something at scale, maybe getting a security audit.
Yeah, we're just going to touch a little bit about an AI and future threats.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here? What do we do? Because we know AI is here and it's available to anyone. And how do we protect us other than the basics that you have mentioned? Because
this is really a very serious issue. And the good news is that the people that are using these sophisticated AI tools, and the AI tools, as you know, are evolving and they get more and more sophisticated every day. The good news is they're mainly focused on the banking networks. There's less focus on ISO IADs, which is sort of good news. However, once the banking networks get tightened up enough, once it becomes hard there, we know the criminals are going to shift, and they'll shift their attention elsewhere because it's going to be wherever what's the easiest place to find it. And again, this is where you have to be very cautious. And I gave a long talk on this about basically there's things called social engineering, which is this is somebody calls you up and they pretend to be somebody else. We know that there are sophisticated tools which are mimicking voices and mimicking identities and so forth, which are sort of AI based. You need to be very, very conscious, as anyone does, whether it's protecting your own personal accounts or your ATM networks, that if you get something like that, that you do some double set of verification. That, hey, is that really my wife, or is that really my business partner that I'm talking to? And good news is that people are smart, and we have instincts that AI systems don't. And usually, if you've got that sort of funny feeling in your gut, trust that funny feeling in your gut. Double verify. Maybe it's innocent, but just taking a little extra step doesn't hurt. And the reality is, it is going to get more and more challenging as time goes on. We know with deep fakes, and there are companies now beginning to specialize in specifically trying to detect false voices, because there's a lot of account takeover stuff occurring in the banking world, where people are basically mimicking voices and so forth. And this stuff sounded like science fiction, again, 5 years ago. This is all real here and now. And it's just making sure you're aware of really the things that are sort of going on. And the other thing, and this may be a little controversial, just be very, very cautious of crypto as well. I know there are operators that offer crypto on their machines and so forth. There are, and I know that could be a very, very profitable stream, because the transaction fees we get on a crypto exchange are much more than you get on a deposit or on a withdrawal or a cash inquiry and so forth. But again, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. Just again, be very, very cautious in terms of that space, because again, there's ample opportunities, and we've seen large operators make errors and make mistakes, and they've suffered basically fatal business errors. Their businesses have been fatally injured as a consequence of it. So it's just being very, very cautious.
What will ATM security look like between 5 to 10 years from now? In your case, like if you have that one that will tell me, like what do you expect to see different?
So there's a few things. Thanks for asking that question. There are a few things which I've been advocating for many years now, which I think are beginning to become true. One of the things which sort of underpins all ATMs is Microsoft Windows. In some form, every ATM in the world runs Microsoft Windows, and there are inherent risks associated with Microsoft Windows, simply because of the Microsoft stops doing updates and security updates and things like that, and because of the pervasiveness of it. Because of that, we're seeing a shift. And if I'm getting too geeky, you stop me. We're seeing a shift from Microsoft Windows over to basically Linux operating systems, which can be potentially inherently more secure. And this is something which both ISO IADs as well as big banks are focused on, basically getting off of Microsoft Windows, which has the benefit of extending the lifetime of machines as well. The other thing, so I think machines which are running a different operating system, number one. The second thing is that the pin pad, I think its days are numbered. The pin pad, again, from the standpoint of security and people with cameras and picking up pins and so forth, the pin pad was an appropriate device again. Long time ago, much the same as the mag stripe on your credit card, which was invented in 1963, by the way. We're seeing mag stripes going away on credit cards, and I think that we will see really people going from pin pad to basically pre-stage transactions on mobile devices, basically completely eliminating the pin pad. And so basically it's similar to what you do with FI machines now, where it's tap and withdraw. I think in the ISO ID space, we'll begin to see tap and withdraw as well, which again has a huge impact in terms of basically security for the customer, and also improves the customer experience as well. And so I think those are really the two biggest things. Is basically mag stripes, finally going away. Basically eliminating the card completely, and it's really going to shift to tap, and along with that, the pin pad goes away. This is stuff which has been in the works for some time, but because of all the things we sort of talked about, and just kind of where technology is, and also sort of the cost pressures on this industry, I think these are things which I see really happening now. And I know the innovative players in the space are focusing on that.
I wish we can go very deep on that, but that's a different conversation. We're talking about security, but I like that. I think the future can take us there. Do you think regulators understand the security challenges independent ATM operators face?
I'm sorry,
I don't think you heard
broke
my
up.
question.
Can you repeat that?
Do you think regulators understand the security challenges independent operators face? Oh no.
Yeah, the answer is no. I actually gave a talk on this October last year to the folks at NACK. There are some 11 separate federal agencies that are involved with ATM networks. 11. And they actually all work at cross purposes with each other. Some of the agencies are certainly sort of conscious of the threat. I spent a lot of time working very closely with FBI financial crimes people, with FinCEN, which is the financial crimes unit. Secret Service certainly understands this. But a lot of the other regulators that are involved in this thing, whether it's CFPB, OCC, and I can give you a whole bunch of three-letter acronyms of federal agencies. I don't think there really is a real understanding, and which is why myself and other colleagues in this space, we've been so actively involved in terms of creating awareness, in Washington D.C. among the regulators, and making sure that they're really aware, number one, in terms of how important this is, but also basically how the industry has become much more exposed, and why really making sure there's good regulation, that there's adequate support particularly in the FBI and so forth, and the Financial Crimes Unit and so forth, to go after these criminals. Because in the past, basically, you could rob ATMs with impunity, and basically there was really no one there that could sort of address that crime. And we've really made, at least in terms of law enforcement agencies within the federal agencies, made sure that they're more aware of that. But there's a lot more work to do with some of the other federal agencies that are involved in this space.
Wow. So there's a lot to that.
There's a lot to there. Yeah.
There's a lot to that. I have two more questions, and this one is more about the life of the ATM. And then, what gives you confidence about the future of cash and ATMs? Because you've been doing this for 40 years. So at one point you were like, "Whoa, this is new," and then this is staying, and then we still have life.
Again, this is one of my favorite subjects. The way I start this subject is my granddaughters. I have adult granddaughters, and they say, "Abuela," they call me Abuela. Abuela, you're so smart. Cash is going away. Why do you do this for a living? We don't understand. And then I sit down with them and I explain, well, that's not the reality. One of my favorite things to do, if you go to the Federal Reserve Board of Governors website, they have a page which is the amount of cash in circulation in terms of number of notes in circulation. And what you'll see if you go to that page is the amount of cash in circulation. This is not inflationary. This is actually the number of notes in circulation, $20 bills, $100 bills, and so forth. Continues to grow at about 3% per year and has continued to grow at about 4 to 3% per year for as long as I can remember. And the federal data supports that. And then the next question is, well, why, if with all these other options out there, whether it's Venmo and PayPal and all these other, why is cash growing? And the answer is really the underground economy. Particularly in the United States, as the economy sort of bifurcated in terms of a lot of very rich people and other people which are maybe not so wealthy. The folks, if you look at the data from the Federal Reserve, if you make, say, less than $25,000 a year, which, believe it or not, is about 30% of the U.S. population, over 50% of all your transactions are done in cash. The underground economy, and this is not fentanyl and automatic weapons, this is hairdressers and nail technicians and servers and gardeners and so forth, is $1.9 trillion with a T, $1.9 trillion. And really what drives cash, and to a large extent what the ISO IAD network service and support, is that portion of the U.S. economy, which is that underground economy, that cash economy, which is large and continues to grow. It's about 15% of GDP.
Wow. So there's future. Keep printing them.
Oh, yeah, it's not going away. And if you look, like I say, checks, they're gone. Checks are always gone. Cash is alive and well and strong, and this is a good industry to be in.
Good. The last question that I have for you, since you mentioned that you have two granddaughters, or three, I forget what you said. They say, Abuela, I am an ATM operator. Three. I said, Abuela Nancy, I have 20 ATMs. We're growing fast, and I want to be a serious professional. I guess I was getting too personal that the gods of the internet decided to shut us down.
Franco, you just dropped. Can you say that again? So you're saying my granddaughters say Abuela.
Abuela Nancy, I have 20 ATMs that I've been doing for the last 20 years, and I'm growing fast, and I want to make sure that this is very serious for me because you say that there's a lot of future. And I heard this podcast that security is very important. What securities foundations should I take before I get bigger? What should I get? Because I want to go from 20 to 200 and eventually to 2,000.
First of all, I tell my granddaughters, no, you're not going to do this.
No, that's not the good start.
No. I'm just joking. And in all seriousness, this can be a wonderful career. It has been incredibly rewarding for me, both in terms of the relationships and the people I know, but also financially and personally. So no, this is a good business to be in. So again, it comes back to sort of the basics. Those machines that you're acquiring, okay, if you take good care of them, they'll last a long time. An ATM, a well-maintained ATM it can last easily 10, 15. I mean, I've seen, old Hyosung 1800 ATMs, which are like 20 years old in a
Still
bodega in
rolling.
New York, and they're graffiti all over them. They're still dispensing $20 bills. And the reason why they can still work is because they've been well maintained. Because cash is dirty, and make sure that it's not really. It's just do the housekeeping on the machine and extend the life of that machine. That's number one. That is protecting that. So those 20 machines you've got, you want to make sure you protect that asset to extend the life of that asset as much as possible. Point one. Point two is all the basics we sort of talked about, which I'm not going to repeat again, but it's software updates, passwords, and stuff like that. But then, and Franco, I think you probably know this. In this industry, it's as much about relationships as it is about technology. And the difference between that I've seen, and I've never been an ATM operator, and that would be kind of a conflict of interest for me with what I've done. But what I've seen is the people that I've seen who have done exactly what you said, who have scaled, who have grown from 20 ATMs to 500 to thousands of ATMs. These are people that really work things from a relationship standpoint. They don't cut corners. They're good business people. They're ethical people, and they protect reputations. I've often said to people that the thing which is most valuable over almost 40 years in this industry that I protect very closely is my reputation. And the same thing is sort of true of an operator as well. There are regrettably some fly-by-night kind of operators out there, but and which can give this industry a little bit of a tainted sort of look to it. But you want to make sure you're protecting your reputation, and which means it's a tough industry, it's a tough business. You have to be a tough business person, but being a tough business person doesn't mean that you're not an ethical person, that you don't maintain a good reputation, and so forth. And I know that is not a very technical answer, but it's what I've seen that sort of differentiated those people that have been small operators and maintain small operators or eventually just walk away, to those who have grown and scaled. And I've had the blessing to sort of know and see many of those people grow. And in fact, I was exchanging messages with somebody in that sort of space that sort of characterizes that this morning. And it's just very, very wonderful to sort of see how people, through a combination of hard work, through their reputation, and through maintaining relationships and growing relationships, can sort of grow that, and in addition to doing all the basic technical stuff. Maybe a different answer than you're expecting.
You know what? If my kid was asking me that, I would tell him the same thing. Your
Okay.
character and your
Awesome.
reputation is more important than
It is.
anything else. Yes, what we do
Than
as a
anything
business is just a channel. It's just a channel, but this applies to anything in our lives. So, Nancy, I appreciate your time. There is a lot of information that we had here. There's a lot more that we could have gone deeper, but we agreed that we were going to talk about security, and we did. We learned change your password, keep the machine updated, and what was the third one?
So again, make sure you keep the software updated on both the machine and the RMS system if you're using RMS. Make sure you're changing the passwords. Make sure you have TLS encryption between the ATM and the processor. Those three big ones.
So follow your processor's instructions, and you will be fine.
Yes, absolutely.
Nancy, thank you. I appreciate this, and don't hang up, please.